You picture ancient Rome, and you picture marble, columns, fountains, a courtyard with a little pool in the middle. Now climb 6 flights of dark stairs, in a building where the steps are wooden and the landing smells like everyone's dinner. No running water up here, no kitchen, no toilet. There is a crack in the wall by the window, and it was there last year too. Your landlord painted over it in the spring. This is where a normal Roman lived, and the rent ate most of what you earned. So where did a normal Roman actually live, and what did it cost to stay there? Not the emperor, not the senator with the garden and the country house. The person on the stairs. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about the greatest city in the ancient world. Rome was not a city of owners, Rome was a city of tenants. And by the end of this, you will not look at your apartment, your landlord, or the fire alarm in your hallway the same way again. Let's start with the obvious, because it breaks the picture in your head. The Roman house you are imagining, the domus, with the courtyard and the pool, was real. Almost nobody lived in one. A late Roman survey of the city counted the buildings, and it found something like 46,000 apartment blocks against fewer than 2,000 private houses. Historians still argue about what exactly got counted. The ratio survives the argument. Rome was flats. The word for the block was insula, it means island. A tall, dense thing standing on its own, with the streets running round it like water, packed with strangers stacked on top of each other. That is not a poetic name, that is a description of a city that ran out of ground and started building up. Now the part that flips your instincts. In your building, the higher you go, the more it costs. In Rome, the exact opposite. The ground floor was the good address, shops opened onto the street. The ceilings were high, the walls were solid stone, and the people with money took the apartments low and wide. Then it got worse with every step up. The upper floors were built lighter and cheaper, timber and mud brick stacked on the stone below. That is all the stone could hold. Rooms got smaller. Ceilings got lower, water stopped. There was no plumbing above the ground floor. So everything you drank, cooked with, or washed in came up those stairs in a jar, on your arms, every single day. The poet Martial mentions in one of his poems that he lives 3 flights up, and high ones. He wanted you to know the cheapest room in Rome was the one with the best view. You have water on every floor of your building. A Roman climbed for his, if that landed, hit like. And there is something else missing up there, and you have already noticed it. There is no kitchen. Most apartments did not have one. And the reason is the same reason your landlord is nervous about candles, fire. An open flame on a wooden floor, 3 stories up, in a building that shares a wall with a bakery, is how a city burns down. So people cooked on a small brazier if they cooked at all, and bought hot food downstairs from the counter on the corner. Which is exactly where we left off in the food episode. No kitchen at home, plus cheap hot food on the street, equals takeout culture. There was no toilet either. There were public latrines, and there was a pot in the corner of the room, and the pot had to go somewhere. Some of it went out of the window. We know this because Roman law had a rule for it. If something was poured or thrown down from a building and it hit someone in the street, the person living up there paid the damage twice over. Rome had a statute for getting slopped on from a great height. Let that sink in. So what did this cost? More than you would guess, and the Romans complained about it in exactly the tone you would. The satirist Juvenal has a character walk through the numbers and lose his temper. For what a dark rented room in Rome costs you for 1 year, he says, you could own a house outright in a small town up the road. A whole house with a garden. His advice is to leave, and people did, and other people kept arriving anyway because Rome was where the work was. Rent was paid by the year, and the rent year in the city began on the 1st of July, so Rome moved house all at once. 1 week of chaos, everyone hauling their beds down the same narrow stairs. And if you fell behind, the law was already on the landlord's side. Everything you carried into that room, your furniture, your tools, your bedding, stood as security for the rent. Miss enough payments and he simply kept it. The deposit dispute you had at 23 is a very old argument. Blame it on Rome. Now, one more thing, and this one is almost to modern. You probably did not rent from the owner. A rich Roman with a block of flats did not want to spend his afternoons chasing tenants for money, so he leased the whole building to somebody else. That person then rented the rooms out one by one at a markup and kept the difference. Which means the man you shouted at about the leak did not own the building. And the man who owned the building never met you. There was always someone in between, and the someone in between had one job: collect. If you have ever argued with a property management company and gotten nowhere, you have met him. He is 2,000 years old. Blame it on Rome. Here is the one I want answered. What did your landlord refuse to fix? And how long did you live with the crack? Tell me. Here is where it stops being funny. These buildings fell down, not rarely. Often enough that Romans had a word for it and a whole genre of jokes about it. Cicero, who owned rental property himself, writes to a friend that 2 of his shops have collapsed and the rest are cracking. Even the mice have moved out, he says. Then he explains, cheerfully, how he plans to turn the disaster into a profit. That is the landlord class talking to itself. Juvenal describes the same routine from the other side. The manager arrives, looks at the ancient crack running down the wall, has it patched over, and tells you to sleep soundly. Meanwhile, the ruin hangs over your bed. The state did respond. Augustus capped how tall a block could be built, at about 70 Roman feet. Trajan lowered the cap again. Every one of those numbers is a scar. Nobody writes a height limit into law because the buildings are fine. And then there was the other way a block came apart. Fire, braziers, oil lamps, timber upper floors, no gaps between buildings, and 1 million people packed into a space you could walk across in an hour. Rome burned constantly. For a long time, the city had no public fire service at all, which brings us to one of the most cold-blooded business models in history. Crassus was the richest man in Rome. He kept a private crew of 500 trained builders. When a building caught fire, his people would arrive, and Crassus would offer to buy it from the owner on the spot at a panic price while it was still burning. Then he put the fire out. Then he rebuilt it and rented it back to the city. Plutarch says he came to own most of Rome that way. Augustus finally created a real fire brigade. The vigils, 7 cohorts of them, thousands of men on the streets at night with buckets, axes, hand pumps, and blankets soaked in vinegar. It was free. They were the night watch too. And their main tool was not water, it was demolition, pulling down the next building along so the fire had nothing to cross to. Now hold on. You might be thinking that this is just what a poor neighborhood looks like anywhere, and that the people running Rome simply did not know any better. Fair question, wrong on both counts. They knew exactly how to build safely because they did it for themselves. Solid stone, low floors, thick walls, water on site. And the people renting out the bad blocks were not strangers to power. They were the senators, the officials, the men writing the laws about buildings. Cicero owned rental property. Crassus owned half the city. The landlord and the lawmaker were frequently the same person at the same dinner, in the same room. So the rules stayed loose, and the block stayed tall, and the rent stayed high, not because Rome was ignorant. Because housing was not infrastructure, it was an investment. Next time we pull apart another thing you pay for every month. Subscribe, and you will never sign a lease the same way again. And that is the uncomfortable part. Rome could do extraordinary things with a building. It roofed the Pantheon with a dome we still cannot fully explain, and it ran clean water into the city across stone bridges from the hills. It had the engineering, it just did not point it at where people slept. And every rule that eventually made those blocks safer was written after something happened. The height limits came after collapses. The fire brigade came after fires. After the Great Fire of '64, the rebuild finally came with a real code. Wider streets, height limits, fireproof stone at the base, no shared walls between buildings, water kept accessible, good rules, written in ash. which is how almost every building rule you live under was written, including the one that put the extinguisher in your hallway. Blame it on Rome. But here is the part one piece of this we actually broke. For 2,000 years, up meant poor, up meant stairs, and no water, and the cheapest room in the building. And Rome set that rule so firmly that Europe kept it for centuries. Then a break in the 1850s. A man named Elisha Otis showed off a safety catch that stopped a lift from falling if the rope snapped. Not the lift, the brake. Within one lifetime, the top floor stopped being the punishment and became the prize, and we invented a word for it, the penthouse. The most expensive address in the building is now the one a Roman would have handed to the poorest tenant in it. We flipped it. It took us 2,000 years and a piece of spring steel. So back to that 6th floor and the crack by the window your landlord painted over in the spring. Now you know what you are standing in, a city of tenants, not owners. A building that gets cheaper and worse the higher you climb, no kitchen, so you eat downstairs. A middleman who collects and does not fix. Furniture the landlord keeps if you fall behind. A height limit written after somebody died. And a fire service that arrived 3 centuries late. You did not invent any of this. You are just the current tenant. So the next time you climb past a crack your landlord has painted over, remember that it was never your idea. Blame it on Rome.